I've always been the responsible one, always the one who shows up, pays the bills, fixes the problems nobody else wants to touch. To the outside world, I'm Courtney Wright, a 35-year-old estate planner who knows every inch of wills and trusts like the back of her hand. But inside my family, I'm the invisible one, the ATM that never stops dispensing, the emotional punching bag that never complains. Last year on my birthday, I sat quietly in the corner of the room as Mom commandeered the entire evening, not to celebrate me, but to heap praise on Susan, my sister, the golden child. Mom's voice was so loud, so filled with pride, that I felt like a shadow shrinking smaller and smaller in the room. I smiled, nodded, but inside, I was crumbling. The cake was barely touched by me. The gifts I received seemed like afterthoughts. It was as if the day, my day, belonged to someone else. Mom is a master at playing the victim, a relentless drama queen who needs the spotlight constantly. Her stories of sacrifice, her tales of hardship, drown out any acknowledgement of what I've done for this family. I've paid the mortgage, the repairs, the bills, more than enough to keep the family home standing for over 15 years. Yet no one sees it. No one thanks me. It's exhausting, this constant giving with no return. But here's the truth. No one knows. I have a secret power. My knowledge of estate law isn't just a job. It's a weapon I've been sharpening quietly. I've kept every receipt, every payment record, every whispered promise on paper. Deep down, I know I hold the key to reclaiming what's mine. Not just the house, but my dignity. The tension simmers beneath the surface, and I'm starting to wonder how long I can keep pretending everything is fine when it's so clearly not. Looking back, I can pinpoint when everything shifted. The year Mom and Dad divorced when I was 12. That was the moment our family dynamic fractured. And Mom, overwhelmed and desperate for validation, began favoring Susan in a way that still stings. Susan was the star pupil, the social butterfly, the one Mom bragged about to anyone who'd listen. Me? I was expected to pick up the slack, to be the quiet caretaker who made sure the house was spotless before Dad came over. I can still smell the lemon cleaner, feel the ache in my knees from scrubbing floors while Susan got her shiny new bike for her birthday. Mom praised Susan openly, showered her with gifts and attention, but I was left in the background, invisible. I thought it was just how families cope with stress, that my sacrifices were part of being the responsible daughter. Now I recognize it for what it was: favoritism born from narcissism, a cruel, entrenched hierarchy where I was the unpaid help, the invisible backbone. Over the years, my sacrifices piled up like invisible bricks holding this family's crumbling facade. I paid the $1,500 monthly mortgage on the house for 15 years, $270,000 of my own money, without a single word of thanks. I covered costly home repairs no one else would touch, paid school fees for Susan's children, and even footed medical bills for Mom when her health took a nosedive. I skipped vacations and worked overtime shifts, all to keep the family afloat while they lived comfortably off my generosity. Liam, my husband, sees it all. He's my quiet strength, the one who reminds me I deserve acknowledgement, who pushes me to see my worth beyond their blindness. Marcus, my younger brother, usually stays silent or sides with Mom by default, and Susan parades around as the favored daughter, blithely oblivious to the cost I've borne. My secret power, the careful financial records, my deep legal knowledge, remains locked away, but it's there, waiting. The breaking point came unexpectedly at last year's holiday dinner. Mom cornered me in front of the whole family, her voice sharp as a whip. "After all I've done for you," she spat, "this is how you repay me?" The accusation hung heavy in the air. I had refused her latest request, a $5,000 loan to cover Susan's extravagant wedding expenses. The room went silent, all eyes on me. My cheeks burned with humiliation as Mom accused me of selfishness, but I forced a tight smile and replied, "I have my own bills to manage, Mom." Inside, my heart cracked. How had my generosity turned into a weapon against me? I told myself it was just stress, that Mom didn't mean it, but a seed of doubt took root. Maybe I'd been invisible for too long, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop being so quiet. The moment I hesitated, Wendy pounced. It was subtle at first. A whispered comment here, a carefully framed story there. But soon it felt like a storm swirling relentlessly around me. I heard from a cousin that Wendy had confided how cold and ungrateful I'd become, how my refusal to fund Susan's wedding broke her heart. The phrase echoed in my mind, a cruel echo of the guilt she wielded like a weapon. I tried to speak up, to explain the years I'd bankrolled the family home, the money I'd poured into their lives quietly, without fanfare. But my words turned to dust. Susan, always quick to defend Mom, repeated Wendy's version to anyone who'd listen, painting me as the villain causing family strife. Even some of my in-laws, who once seemed neutral, began to side with Wendy. It was as if I'd become the problem, the source of the discord I never asked for. The gaslighting was relentless. At family dinners, I noticed the sharp glances, the hushed conversations that fell silent when I approached. Marcus, who used to call me every Sunday, now rarely answered my texts. His silence was the heaviest blow. Liam tried to shield me, to keep peace, but even his patience wore thin as tension seeped into our home. I caught myself doubting my own memories. Had I really been so demanding? Was I the ungrateful one? But no. I clung tightly to the truth I knew. I had given everything and received nothing but blame. The isolation was suffocating. But beneath the hurt, a quiet ember of determination sparked. I wouldn't let their lies define me. I was done shrinking into the shadows. One evening, after a particularly biting comment from Susan at a family gathering, I found myself standing alone in the cold, the night air sharp against my skin. I traced the worn edges of the mortgage statements in my pocket, the proof of my sacrifice, and felt a surge of resolve. Wendy's campaign was meant to break me, but instead, it had revealed how much I had been carrying alone. The house wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was the symbol of my endurance, my unseen labor. If they wanted to rewrite the story, I was ready to tell it my way. But first, I had to try one last time to make them see. Without anger, without accusation, just truth. I set a date for a family mediation, hoping to bridge the widening gap. I prepared meticulously, gathering every receipt, every bank statement, every note I'd kept over the years. When the day came, I walked into the room carrying the weight of my history, but also a fragile hope for peace. Wendy sat across from me, her eyes glistening with tears before the conversation even began. The mediator, a family friend who had known us all our lives, nodded encouragingly, urging us to speak openly. I laid out my case calmly, explaining my financial support with clear records, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. But Wendy's response shattered any hope I had. She wept as she spoke about sacrifices I'd never acknowledged, about how she had given up everything for me and Susan. Her words wrapped around the room like a suffocating fog, drowning out my facts with emotion. The mediator, swayed by her display, dismissed my evidence as cold bookkeeping that missed the heart of family. When I tried to interject, Wendy cut me off with a trembling voice, accusing me of tearing the family apart. Susan chimed in, her disappointment sharp and public. "I thought you cared about family, Courtney. This hostility is so unlike you." I sat frozen as my efforts crumbled around me, realizing the gulf between us was wider than I'd feared. I left that room feeling smaller than ever, the weight of isolation pressing down like a stone. Weeks later, Susan's wedding arrived, a glittering event that felt like a battleground. I wasn't even invited to the planning meetings, relegated to a minor role as an afterthought. The opulence of the day was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements, and a guest list that seemed endless. At the reception, Wendy took the microphone and lavished praise on Susan's in-laws for their generous contributions, her voice warm and proud. Not a word about the years I'd quietly kept the family home from slipping into foreclosure. Not a hint of gratitude for the payments I'd made to cover debts no one else would touch. My throat tightened as I watched the crowd nod and applaud, oblivious to the real story. After the speeches, I found Wendy alone near the garden. My voice trembled as I confronted her. "Mom, I did everything to keep this family afloat. Why won't you acknowledge that?" She looked at me with a sneer that cut deeper than any words before. "You're just jealous you're not the favorite," she spat. her tone dripping with contempt. I felt every eye in the nearby crowd turn toward us, their curiosity like hot knives slicing through my skin. The humiliation burned, a fiery shame that mingled with a growing anger. Susan's extravagant spending was celebrated openly, while my sacrifices were invisible, my contributions erased. That night cemented a truth I could no longer deny. I was their scapegoat, the family's convenient target for blame and dismissal. Desperation drove me to one last conversation with Wendy. I found her in the quiet of the family home, the place my payments had preserved despite her debts and secrets. I spoke calmly, my voice steady, but carrying the weight of years of pain. "Mom, I need you to see me, not just as the one who writes the checks, but as your daughter. I want respect. I want acknowledgement for the home I've kept alive." She looked at me, eyes cold and unyielding. "If you loved me, you wouldn't keep score," she said sharply, the familiar guilt trap. I took a breath and met her gaze directly. "I'm not keeping score, Mom. I'm setting boundaries. I won't be exploited anymore." Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "Stop making everything about money," she said, her voice cutting like ice. In that moment, I felt the final line between us snap. My limits, emotional and financial, had been crossed. The family I'd tried to hold together was breaking apart, and I was no longer willing to be the glue. The gossip had already begun before I even stepped into the room. Demanding, ungrateful, causing family rifts, words that felt like daggers twisting in my chest. I'd never imagined my attempts to protect what was mine could be twisted so quickly into villainy. Marcus, my own brother, who once called me every Sunday without fail, now barely returned my texts. His silence was deafening, a quiet betrayal that stung worse than any harsh word. I caught the subtle shift during family gatherings, the way he avoided my gaze, how he sided with Mom's version of events without question. It felt like I was slowly being erased, my presence unwelcome in the very home I'd kept afloat for years. Liam tried to stand beside me, his quiet strength a balm against the storm, but even he faced pressure from his family to stay out of it, as if I was some contagious problem to be avoided. Their whispered warnings, the uneasy glances, they chipped away at the sanctuary we'd built together. I found myself retreating into the walls of our home, the silence pressing down like a heavy fog. Each night I lay awake questioning everything. Was I truly justified in standing my ground? Had I become selfish, demanding more than I deserved? The doubts gnawed at me relentlessly, twisting my sense of right and wrong until I felt unmoored. At work, I buried myself in legal documents, trying to drown out the ache of isolation, but the loneliness seeped into every corner of my life. My phone buzzed with fewer messages. Invitations to family events stopped arriving. The few who did show up looked through me, not at me, as if my sacrifices were invisible, my existence inconvenient. The house, once a symbol of stability, now felt like a cage built from my own efforts, trapping me in a role I never chose but couldn't escape. My voice, once steady and sure, faltered with uncertainty. The weight of being the family's scapegoat pressed down so heavily that I wondered if I'd ever see light again. Despite the crushing rejection, a part of me clung to hope, a fragile thread that maybe, just maybe, this storm would pass. But as the days stretched on, that hope dimmed to a flicker. I was alone in a crowd, adrift in a sea of accusations and silent betrayals. The unrelenting tide of family disdain left me raw and exposed. Yet beneath the exhaustion, a quiet ember burned, a stubborn refusal to let their judgment define me. I was more than their whispers, more than the sum of their blame. But I had never felt so utterly, achingly alone. The night before my birthday was the darkest moment. I sat in the empty living room, the echo of my own thoughts louder than any voice. The calendar on the wall mocked me. Another year, another chance for recognition that would never come. I traced the edges of the mortgage statements I kept folded in my drawer, the tangible proof of my years of sacrifice. It was all so painfully clear now. The family I'd tried to hold together was fracturing, and I was slipping through the cracks. I let the tears come, not from weakness, but from the weight of a love that felt unreturned. The silence of my own heart was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. When the day finally arrived, I had dared to hope. I planned a quiet gathering, a small circle of friends and a few relatives, to mark my 35th birthday. I imagined laughter, warm smiles, maybe even a word of thanks from Mom. But hope was a fragile thing, easily shattered. As I pulled up to the venue, the festive sounds of celebration hit me like a punch. The parking lot was crowded, voices spilling out into the evening air. But it wasn't my party. It was Susan's. Wendy had orchestrated a surprise celebration for her, deliberately timed to eclipse my own. I stood frozen just inside the door, heart pounding, as I scanned the room. A handful of guests trickled in for me, well-meaning but sparse. Across the room, Susan basked in applause, surrounded by a sea of smiling faces. The sight was a cruel mirror of every birthday past, reflecting how little I mattered in their eyes. Wendy's voice rang out, loud and clear, laced with false warmth. "Let's all raise a glass to Susan, the true gem of this family. So bright, so deserving." Laughter followed her words, but it was the kind of laughter that stung, mocking me with its sharp edges. When our eyes met, I saw triumph gleaming in Mom's. There was no space for me here, no celebration, no acknowledgement, just the bitter reminder of my place, invisible and alone. The humiliation was raw and deep, slicing through the years of unseen labor and quiet endurance. My cheeks burned, my throat tightened, but I held my ground. In that moment, a cold clarity settled over me. Beneath the crushing pain, something inside shattered, a fragile shell of hope and submission cracking open. The years of invisibility, the emotional manipulation, the financial burden, they converged into a single, undeniable truth. I felt the weight of every ignored payment, every dismissed sacrifice, every silent tear, and with it, a vow formed in the depths of my soul. Never again. This family would finally see the truth. I would no longer be the shadow fading on the edges of their lives. I would protect what was mine. Not just the house, but my dignity and my future. The victim was gone, replaced by a woman fueled by resolve. Quietly, deliberately, I steeled myself for the fight ahead. After the party, I retreated to the quiet sanctuary of our home, the familiar creak of the floorboards grounding me in the stillness. Alone with my thoughts, I replayed every moment, the smiles that didn't reach eyes, the whispered jokes at my expense, the way Wendy's words had cut through the warmth of the room like ice. The anger beneath my pain simmered, a slow burn that began to ignite into a fierce clarity. I pulled out the folders of financial records I'd kept, the bank statements, the mortgage payments, the receipts from repairs I'd funded without a word of thanks. As I traced each line of numbers, the truth crystallized. I had wielded more power than I ever allowed myself to acknowledge. I was the backbone of this family's home, the keeper of its fragile foundation. And yet, I'd been silenced, gaslit into believing my generosity was selfishness. The patterns of favoritism, the endless emotional manipulation, the dismissals disguised as concern, they all came into sharp focus. The fog of confusion lifted, replaced by a fierce resolve. No longer would I accept invisibility. No more sacrifices without respect. I whispered to the empty room, steady and sure, "Never again." The words echoed inside me, a mantra of transformation. My anger was no longer a destructive force, but a sharpened tool. I would fight not with reckless emotion, but with precision and strategy. The woman who had suffered in silence was awakening, ready to claim her power. This wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about reclaiming my life on my terms. The next morning, over coffee with Liam, I shared everything: the humiliation of the party, the years of unacknowledged sacrifice, the growing certainty that I couldn't stay silent any longer. "I'm going to do a full financial audit," I told him, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "If I can prove who actually paid what, I can stop them from trying to steal my home." Liam nodded, his eyes steady and supportive. "Whatever you need, I'm with you," he said quietly, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Together, we began to outline the plan, gather every bank statement, every mortgage payment, every repair receipt, every legal document that could build an airtight case. The weight of years of secrecy and sacrifice suddenly felt lighter shared between us. Liam's practical mind helped me map the steps, while his unwavering belief in me bolstered my courage. The shift from reactive victim to proactive strategist was palpable in my bones. For the first time in a long time, I felt empowered. The path ahead was daunting, but it was mine to walk. I was no longer hiding in the shadows of their lies and manipulation. I was preparing to confront them with undeniable truth. The family that had tried to erase me would have to reckon with the woman I was becoming. Resilient, determined, and ready to fight for what was rightfully mine. I spread the papers across the kitchen table: bank statements, mortgage records, wire transfer confirmations, all meticulously organized. The weight of years of hidden support pressed down on me as I traced each transaction from my accounts to the family's. Wendy and Susan's reliance on my money was staggering. They lived off my quiet generosity, taking from me without ever acknowledging the truth. Yet none of them had any legal claim to the house or the funds I'd poured into it. The realization settled like ice in my veins. Their dependence was a vulnerability, a lever I had never dared to pull before. I reached out to an old colleague from the firm, someone I trusted implicitly, and we spoke in hushed tones late into the night. She confirmed what I had suspected. The forged deed Wendy had slipped into the family records was a weak shield at best. Without transparency and with evidence stacking against her, the house's ownership was firmly mine. Wendy's desperation had driven her to risky moves, and the house was her last bastion of control. The more I learned, the clearer it became. Her entire facade depended on my silent endurance and financial backing. Mapping their dependencies wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, Wendy's emotional manipulation, Susan's favoritism, the family's collective blindness to my sacrifices, all threads in a fragile web. If I could untangle it, expose the truth, I could reclaim what was mine. My legal knowledge was a weapon, but it was the understanding of their reliance on me that sharpened my strategy. They needed me more than I'd allowed myself to believe, and now, that need was a key. As I closed the files, I felt a strange calm. The years of silent suffering hadn't been wasted. I was no longer invisible. I was the linchpin. The family's future was precarious, balanced on my willingness to keep the lie alive. But I wasn't ready to break that silence yet. Not until I had a plan to protect myself, and the home I'd fought so hard to save. I began gathering every document I'd ever tucked away: emails, bank statements, mortgage receipts, stacking them neatly in binders. I changed passwords on every shared account, locking down access without a word. Liam watched quietly, his steady presence a balm as I moved through the motions methodically. We informed my lawyer about the brewing dispute, alerting her to the possibility of legal challenges ahead. The mundane routines of family life continued around me, but beneath the surface, I was preparing for war. Every smile I offered at family dinners, every nod at gatherings, was a carefully crafted mask. No one suspected the storm gathering behind my calm exterior. I drafted a detailed financial audit report, outlining every dollar I'd contributed, every debt I'd covered. Liam helped me organize the paperwork, role-playing confrontations so I could steel myself against the inevitable emotional assaults. The work was exhausting but necessary. It was the foundation of my defense. Meanwhile, Wendy and Susan continued their charade, oblivious to the tightening noose. I watched them from a distance, their careless spending and entitlement glaringly obvious as I tightened my grip on the facts. The quiet preparation felt like a slow-burning fuse, each step deliberate and precise. I was no longer the family's invisible caretaker. I was becoming a force they could no longer ignore. Late one evening, as I combed through Wendy's financial disclosures, a chilling discovery stopped me cold. Beneath the layers of statements and tax returns lay a secret she'd fought to bury, a staggering debt exceeding $1.2 million in unpaid loans and credit lines. The weight of it crushed the facade. Wendy's desperate attempts to hide this mountain of liabilities, the forged deed to the family home designed to shield assets from creditors. Everything suddenly made sense. This secret debt was the source of her frantic control, her relentless emotional manipulation, and her refusal to acknowledge my sacrifices. The family's polished image was nothing but a fragile veneer over a crumbling foundation. With this knowledge, my position wasn't just strong. It was unassailable. I shared the truth with Liam and my lawyer, the urgency clear in my voice. We had to act quickly before Wendy's lies swallowed us all. The plan evolved. Confront Wendy with undeniable proof of my ownership and her hidden liabilities. The scales were tipping. The family's carefully crafted illusion was unraveling, and I held the key. A surge of confidence filled me. The truth was finally on my side. The game had changed, and for the first time, I felt the power shift in my favor. The first moves were deliberate and silent. I cut off financial support to Wendy and Susan, canceling their unauthorized access to shared accounts without fanfare. I notified the mortgage company of irregularities in the ownership claims, planting the seeds of legal scrutiny. Certified letters outlining my audit findings and legal rights were sent, formal and unyielding. Wendy's financial lifelines began to dry up, but she remained blind to the source. Small cracks appeared quickly. Bills went unpaid. Creditors called more frequently, their voices a growing chorus of pressure. Wendy's control faltered, but she blamed everyone else. I stayed calm, professional, refusing to be baited into emotional confrontations. My silence was a weapon, a quiet assertion of power beneath the storm. The family's illusion of control started to crumble, unseen by those who clung to their narratives. Susan's smirks faded when payments stopped coming. Wendy's frantic phone calls went unanswered. Marcus, ever the silent observer, sensed the tension but said nothing. No one connected the dots to me yet. I was the unseen hand pulling the threads, orchestrating the unraveling with quiet precision. As I watched from behind the scenes, a strange mixture of relief and resolve settled over me. The long years of sacrifice and invisibility had led to this moment. No longer a victim, but a woman reclaiming her dignity and power. The first stones had been cast. The family's house of cards was beginning to fall, and I was ready for whatever came next. The day of reckoning arrived with a heavy stillness that settled over the family gathering like a storm about to break. The room buzzed with forced smiles and careful glances, the undercurrents of tension thick and electric. I stood in the center, clutching the stack of documents I had prepared. The financial audit, the bank statements, the mortgage records, and the legal papers affirming my sole ownership of the house. My hands trembled for a moment, but I pushed the fear aside. This was my moment. The truth laid bare, the foundation of years of silent suffering finally exposed. "Mom," I began, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "You tried to claim this home with a fake deed, but the law and the numbers prove otherwise." I let the words hang in the air, watching as the room fell into an unnatural quiet. Eyes darted between me and Wendy, whose face had gone pale, her carefully constructed mask slipping. I spread the documents out on the table, sliding the mortgage payment records forward, the bank statements next, each page a line of undeniable proof. Then I dropped the heaviest truth. And there's more. "Mom, you've been hiding a secret debt. Over $1 million in unpaid loans that threatens everything we have. The creditors are closing in, and this home could be lost." The room shifted. Susan's eyes widened. Marcus's face tightened with confusion and disbelief. Wendy opened her mouth, but no words came. The usual gaslighting attempts fell flat under the weight of cold, hard evidence. I met Wendy's gaze without flinching. "This isn't about guilt or blame anymore. I have the expertise and the facts on my side. From now on, I decide what happens with my home and my finances." The power reversal was complete. I felt something inside me click, a release, a surge of strength. The family could no longer deny what was true. The invisible daughter was finally seen, and she refused to be silenced again. The humiliation I had endured for years was replaced by a fierce dignity. I watched as Wendy's defenses collapsed, her control slipping through her fingers like sand. The room's atmosphere shifted from tension to a stunned reckoning. Susan's once smug expression faded, replaced by uncertainty. Marcus looked torn, caught between loyalty and truth. The gathering that had been meant to maintain the family's illusion instead became the stage for its unraveling. I stood firm, the architect of my own liberation, my voice calm but unwavering as I laid out the facts that would change everything. The fallout was swift and merciless. Wendy's world, which had seemed so solid, fractured beneath the weight of exposure. Creditors, now aware of the debt, began making calls that echoed through the family's social circles. The facade of the perfect family life cracked, whispers of financial scandal spreading like wildfire. Yet, amidst the chaos, I remained the eye of the storm, calm, resolute, and unyielding. Wendy's attempts to regain control were pitifully transparent. She flooded me with frantic phone calls, her voice dripping with false remorse and desperate pleas. "Courtney, please, can't we just forgive and forget? I'm your mother," she begged, but I held firm, my boundaries unbreached. Susan's loyalty wavered visibly, the realization of their mother's deception shaking her foundation. Even Marcus, long silent, began questioning the narrative they had all accepted without scrutiny. I responded with measured politeness, never engaging in the emotional manipulation that had defined our past interactions. Each refusal was a quiet assertion of my newfound strength. Wendy's love bombing fell on deaf ears, and her apologies felt hollow against the backdrop of undeniable truth. Social invitations declined, phone calls unanswered. Her isolation deepened as her control slipped away. The power that once belonged to her now rested firmly in my hands. The transformation within me was palpable. With every boundary I set, with every truth I revealed, I shed the years of invisibility and exploitation. The family's whispers of scandal became the soundtrack of my emancipation. Wendy's desperation was no longer a threat, but a sign of her unraveling. I felt my confidence growing, rooted not in anger but in the certainty that I was reclaiming my life, my home, and my dignity with each passing day. Wendy's last attempts to manipulate were as predictable as they were futile. She sent others to me, family friends and distant relatives, tasked with guilt-tripping, pleading for reconciliation and warning of legal battles. Threats to expose private details surfaced, intended to intimidate me into submission. She spun stories casting me as the villain, the ungrateful daughter tearing the family apart. Even Liam and Marcus were pressured, asked to intervene on her behalf, but I was ready. The legal counsel we had retained stood firmly with me, dismissing Wendy's threats as baseless in the face of the audit's overwhelming evidence. I deflected every emotional ploy with calm resolve, refusing to be drawn into the toxic drama that had defined my past. My boundaries, once porous and vulnerable, were now impenetrable walls of steel. The flying monkeys, those emissaries of Wendy's manipulation, found no purchase. Their words bounced off the armor I had forged through months of preparation. Family members began to distance themselves from Wendy's increasingly erratic behavior, her isolation growing as her credibility crumbled. Her final cards were played, but the game was no longer hers to win. In the stillness of this personal battlefield, I felt a quiet triumph. The woman who had suffered in silence was now the one setting the terms. Wendy's manipulations, once so effective, were powerless against the clarity and strength I had cultivated. Each attempt she made to reclaim control only pushed her further into solitude. The family's fracture was painful, but necessary, and I stood on the solid ground of truth and justice. Now, standing on the other side of the storm, I embraced a peace I had never known. The family home, both a sanctuary and a symbol of my endurance, was legally and emotionally mine. Liam's steady support had been my anchor, and together we faced a future unburdened by the past's toxic shadows. I had drawn clear boundaries, banishing exploitation and invisibility from my life. Wendy remained estranged, a cautionary figure defined by pride and deception. Yet, despite everything, I wished her healing from afar, no longer tethered to her toxicity. Slowly, Marcus and Susan began the tentative process of acknowledging the truths I had long carried alone. The possibility of future reconciliation flickered on the horizon, fragile but real. As I reflected on the journey, from overlooked sacrifices to the public confrontation that had shifted our family's dynamics, I felt an overwhelming sense of hope. I was no longer the scapegoat, but the architect of my destiny. The past's pain had forged a woman who knew her worth, who refused to fade in the shadows. Blood ties did not guarantee loyalty or respect, but truth and justice would always find their way. In the quiet moments, I allowed myself to dream of a future defined not by betrayal, but by respect and self-worth. The scars remained, but so did the strength. I had reclaimed my life, my home, and my dignity, and that was a victory no one could take away.